So the American president says this is more than a ceasefire. He actually says this is the most important peace deal for 3,000 years. He's not underselling it. But is he right?
Well, I think what we've all seen today was these incredibly moving images, things that maybe even 3 months ago people just thought were not possible. Families being united, hostages who had been held in captivity for 2 years, the most unimaginable ordeal, going back to see sons back with parents, loved ones back together again. So this is a hugely important moment, and alongside the ceasefire and also the restoration of humanitarian aid after tens of thousands of people have lost their lives as a result of this appalling conflict over the last 2 years. But it is part of a 20-point plan that President Trump has set out. It's part of a wider initiative. I think that is really important. It is phase one. There's a lot of work still to do. But I think it's the fact that it is part of this wider plan to deliver a just and lasting peace with security for Palestinians and Israelis alike. That is what has made this so important, and also has made it possible to get to the ceasefire now.
So I want to get on to the next phase in this process, but would you agree that this is President Trump's personal towering achievement? And do you think, as the Israeli Prime Minister thinks, that he should get the Nobel Peace Prize next year?
Well, he's clearly been a driving force behind this. This has relied on President Trump himself being prepared to show this leadership. There's obviously a lot
Nobel Peace Prize?
Well, that's obviously the process that has to take place independently, but I don't think anybody should be in doubt about the scale of the work that President Trump has himself done in this process. Obviously, there's also been the hugely important work by Qatar, by Turkey, by Egypt as part of the negotiations. And there's been work by a lot of different countries from all over the world working together to build the momentum through the summer that has made this initiative possible, and also coming together. I was in Paris last week talking to Arab states and European states about what we need to do to implement the first stage of the ceasefire and also to make possible phase two, which is going to be critical as well.
So what gets us to phase two? What do you understand about this board of peace? Donald Trump seemed to me to imply, and has addressed the Knesset, that he will be chairing it. There is the likelihood that Tony Blair will be a member of it. Will that effectively be the governing body for Gaza? And if so, for how long?
Palestine needs to be run by Palestinians, and Gaza needs to be run by Palestinians.
Or immediately, or after a transition?
So I think, look, the first phase is going to be actually just implementing the first phase as well. We're making sure that the aid gets back in, making sure that we've got that restoration of humanitarian aid. That's
but in first phase for Netanyahu, but just on this, because there are some really complicated issues here.
Yeah.
So, Israel is saying that Hamas has to be disarmed. How does that even happen?
Yeah, so that is going to be part of phase two. That is part of the 20-point plan. So there's a whole series of different things. There includes a Palestinian committee that needs to be set up to actually run run services in Palestine.
Underneath this Board of Peace?
So the Board of Peace was set out in the 20-point plan as overseeing the peace process, but actually the delivery of services, the decisions taken in Gaza itself, the 20-point plan envisages that being done by a Palestinian committee. But look, these are the details that are going to need to be now developed and worked through as part of the second phase of the negotiations, the second phase of work that's being done. It does include the decommissioning of weapons, making sure that Hamas plays no role in the governance of Gaza or the governance of Palestine. All of those are going to be really important issues, but they are things that the Hamas has signed up to, that the Israeli government has signed up to, and that Arab states have signed up to, European states have signed up to. You've got this very broad consensus around the overarching approach of that plan, but a lot of work still to do to turn that into a reality.
I mean, as far as I can see, Tony Blair was the only sort of non-leader on the stage with President Trump in Egypt this afternoon. Is it good for Britain that Blair's at the heart of this?
Well, he's been nominated. Tony Blair's been nominated by President Trump. We are expecting other people to be put forward for the Board of Peace.
But is it good for Britain?
Well, I think, look, this is about the effectiveness of the peace process. I think this is actually not about what's right for Britain or for France or for the US. This is actually about what is right for the Middle East and the process that President Trump has set out. We're expecting other people to be nominated as well, including other leaders, former leaders, and so on. So all of that will be established as part of the second phase of negotiations.
If this is proper peace, should we resume selling arms to Israel?
Well, I think we have got a whole series of stages to go right now. And the first phase is to make sure that the ceasefire is implemented and also to make sure that we get the restoration of aid. Then there's the second phase still to be established. The thing that we have been very clear about is that in the end, the only way to get a just and lasting peace is a two-state solution. And that needs to be a peaceful Palestine, a peaceful Israel living alongside each other, both of them in security.
I mean, President Netanyahu has been on the record multiple times that he doesn't believe in a two-state solution. Do you honestly believe we will see progress in that direction while he remains Prime Minister?
So the 20-point plan itself does include a reference to Palestinian statehood for the first time. That, I think, is very significant. You've heard some of the comments that President Trump has made on this. Again, very different from things that previous US presidents might have made over previous years. So I think this is very important. It's an important part of it, and it's something that we strongly believe in, ultimately, because otherwise we will not get security for either Israelis or Palestinians, and we won't get the just and lasting peace that we need. So I think it is really important. Of course, there are a lot of steps along the way that we're going to need to take and to make sure happen that will have to be part of the second phase of negotiations. So nobody is sort of underestimating the scale of the challenge, but it is really significant, the scale of commitment that we've seen from countries across the world to support this in a way that I don't believe we have ever seen before.
Now, we've got to move on to a substantially different subject, and Pippa is going to set it up for us.
Thanks, Robert. Should we be cozying up to China or keeping it out in the cold? This question has troubled governments for years. While they want closer economic ties, spy chiefs have urged caution. Now, back in November 2021, the head of MI6 warned that China had become its single greatest priority. Prosecutors allege that just a month later, Christopher Cash, who worked for a Tory MP, and his friend Christopher Berry, a researcher based in China, began spying for Beijing. They were arrested in March 2023 and a year later were charged under the now repealed Official Secrets Act. They both denied the charges. In July even, 2024, a different spy trial of 6 Bulgarians accused of helping Russia set a legal precedent that an enemy state had to pose a current threat to the national security of the UK. Because of this, prosecutors asked the government for more evidence of China being a threat at the time the two men were accused of spying. Prosecutors say that efforts to obtain that evidence were made over many months. More witness statements were provided, but it wasn't enough. So the charges were dropped. Politicians have been pointing fingers ever since, with the Tories accusing the government of deliberately collapsing the case to smooth relations with Beijing. Robert.
Thanks. So your government has said that it deeply regrets the collapse of this trial. Now, as Pippa has pointed out, the CPS tried over months to get the kind of supporting statement that it needed. We learned this afternoon in the House of Commons from Dan Jarvis, your colleague, that the Deputy National Security Advisor just never provided that. What on earth went wrong? Why did Matthew Collins never provide the relevant evidence?
So I remain deeply frustrated by this case, and I think I've been very clear. I think we wanted to see this prosecution go ahead, and also I think we should be clear that the kind of activity that was being alleged in this case, that kind of activity, I think should be illegal. It should be the kind of case that faces the legal processes, criminal processes, and that's why we supported a change in the law, the modernisation of the law in this area that makes those kinds of prosecutions much clearer and much easier. I think we've also said, and I've said in the past as well, that it was clear that China poses threats to national security. It is also our third biggest trading partner. So, of course, that is a complex relationship. But those threats to national security include cyber threats, include the transnational repression, include the kind of political industrial espionage, and include the support for Russia as well at the current time. So a whole series of different areas. But this was an independent legal process about offences and framework at the time.
But they blame it on the fact that you, as a government, in the shape of, apparently, Matthew Collins, didn't provide the information they needed. Now, this was after, right? I mean, the offence, the alleged offence committed by these two individuals was after China was found to have hacked the Electoral Commission, right? The previous government put that on the record. So there was very clear evidence that they were you listed cyber. There are plenty of other... I mean, I remember Rishi Sunak saying in 2022 and 2023 that he regarded China as the greatest economic threat that we faced, right? So why was it that Matthew Collins just didn't supply any of this?
So ministers were not involved in any of the evidence for the case, and also this was a decision for the Crown Prosecution Service, an independent legal process.
Yeah, but they pushed it back to you. They've said it's because they did not get the cooperation they needed from the government.
There were decisions that had to be made by the independent Crown Prosecution Service about what threshold had to be met, and also there was evidence given independently to them that ministers were not involved in. Of course, the added complexity of this is that these were offences.
Sorry, for a second. You haven't answered the question. Was this a cock-up on your part? I don't mean you personally. I mean the government.
So let me just finish the point. Of course, the complexity with this is that this was offences that took place under the previous government and under previous legislation. So for that reason, ministers were not involved, and that was clearly the case. So I did not see any of the evidence that was put to the Crown Prosecution Service, and that was an independent decision that the Crown Prosecution Service faced. But if you ask me, am I frustrated about this whole process and the lack of prosecution?
Honestly,
yes, I am.
Look, I've been around this for long enough to know that what you've just said makes no sense. You inherit, as the new government, decisions taken by the previous government. You know, this was not a prosecution of ministers. This was about the position of the government. So the notion that you, as ministers, were not consulted by the National Security Advisor, or in this case, apparently it just makes no sense.
And that's the process that we've inherited, where the CPS sought advice and sought expert witness from the Deputy National Security Advisor, who gave evidence.
But why did the Deputy National Security Advisor not go to his boss, who then should have gone to his boss about this? It makes, I'm sorry to say this, none of it makes sense.
So ministers were not consulted.
But why not? Do you understand why they weren't consulted? I'm sorry to press you on this, but it makes no sense. Why were ministers not consulted?
So ministers
were not. Know the answer to that question?
Ministers were not, and this.
But do you not know why they were not?
Hang on a second, Robert. This was a process involving the independent Crown Prosecution Service, who sought the evidence. They chose which witnesses they wanted to seek evidence from, and those witnesses had to then give personal evidence to the Crown Prosecution Service. Do I think that this was an extremely frustrating process? Does it involve laws, previous laws, and also the previous government? And do we end up with a very frustrating process that means that the kind of activity which clearly should face legal processes ends up, as a result, not doing so? This remains a matter of extreme frustration for me and for many other people.
OK. You're saying that Matthew Collins didn't consult his political masters. Do you know whether he consulted his boss, Jonathan Powell?
So my understanding is that, no, the National Security Advisor was not involved in this process in terms of the content of the evidence that was put forward.
So do you have any confidence in this man, Matthew Collins. Can he keep his job on this basis?
So the Deputy National Security Advisor had to give evidence on the basis of what happened before I was in government. While he was still in government, but before I was in government. That does make this process more complicated than dealing with other cases because of the change in government at the time. So we have to recognise that. And we do also inherit a situation where the previous government chose not to change the law for many years, despite having been advised against doing so. But the most important thing is we do now have a change in the law. We have to be very clear about the importance of both being strong against national security threats that may be posed by China and also, alongside that, recognising the investment, recognising the economic relationships and so on as well. That is the complexity of the relationship that we have.
Look, with the best will in the world, I don't think this is going to go away because, in the end, a decision you regret taken by the CPS happened on your watch. Final question. This embassy in the Royal Mint that China wants to open, should it be allowed to open it?
There's an independent planning process. As you know, we don't comment on planning processes.
But you've admitted that they've posed a national security threat. They're not allowing you to see various rooms that plainly sort of serve a material purpose for them. Surely they shouldn't get permission to open the embassy.
There have been a series of discussions about security issues and about security mitigations. As you'll know, there's always countries do have embassies, and there always have to be security questions about those embassies. The UK also has an embassy in Beijing, where we've been seeking improvements, modernisations and new embassy buildings in Beijing as well. So these issues always have to be dealt with by countries. What we do ensure is that where there are national security issues, those are taken immensely seriously. You'll appreciate there is an independent planning process, but those issues are taken extremely seriously.
Foreign Secretary, as always, very good to see you. Thank you.